Hello everyone, welcome back to the new video of AP Knowledge Point. 26 July 1999. The guns of Kargil were falling silent. India had won. The infiltrating forces had been pushed back. The heights had been recaptured. The tricolor was flying again. Across the country, people celebrated. But inside India's security establishment, there was no celebration yet. There was a question, a very uncomfortable question. How had the intrusion happened in the first place? How did enemy forces manage to occupy strategically important heights before India fully understood the scale of the operation? Why were warning signs not acted upon in time? And most importantly, could it happen again? The Kargil War had exposed weaknesses, but those weaknesses would become the starting point for one of the most important transformations in India's defense and security system. This is the story of what happened after Kargil. Victory with questions. Kargil had demonstrated extraordinary courage on the battlefield, but military victories can sometimes hide institutional weaknesses. The soldiers had done their job. They had climbed mountains, captured positions, destroyed enemy defenses, and reclaimed territory, but the war was also raising the questions about intelligence, surveillance, coordination, communication, and the ability of different agencies to share information quickly. India needed answers, not for political reasons, not simply to assign blame, but because the next conflict could be different and the next enemy could be better prepared. The Kargil Review Committee. After the war, the Government of India established the Kargil Review Committee. Its purpose was to examine the events leading up to the conflict. What happened? Why did it happen? How did intelligence agencies respond? How prepared were the armed forces and what needed to change? The committee examined India's national security system in considerable detail. Its findings became the foundation for a much broader examination of India's defense architecture. The message was clear. Winning a war is important, but preventing strategic surprise is even better. Intelligence and surveillance. Kargil highlighted the importance of knowing what is happening across difficult terrain. The Himalayas are enormous. They contain thousands of kilometers of rugged mountains, snow, glaciers, rock faces, remote valleys, and maintaining constant surveillance is extremely difficult. The lesson was obvious. India needed better eyes on the battlefield. This meant improving surveillance capabilities, better intelligence gathering, better communication, better coordination between agencies, and faster transmission of information from the field to decision makers. The battlefield of the future would not depend only on soldiers with rifles. It would also depend on sensors, satellites, aircrafts, drones, radar, communication systems, and information. The three services. Kargil also demonstrated the something else. The Army, Navy, and Air Force could not operate as completely separate institutions. Modern warfare increasingly requires coordination. The Army may need air support. The Air Force may depend on ground intelligence. The Navy may need to create strategic pressure elsewhere. Information must move quickly between all three. This idea became known as jointness. The objective was simple. Instead of thinking only as three separate services, India needed to increasingly think of them as parts of one integrated military system. Operation Safed Sagar. During Kargil, the Indian Air Force had conducted Operation Safed Sagar. The experience demonstrated the importance and complexity of air power in high altitude warfare. Aircraft had to operate in extreme terrain. Targets were difficult to identify. Weather could change rapidly. Mountains created unique challenges. The lessons learned from the air campaign would contribute to future thinking about precision weapons, surveillance, intelligence, and integrated operations. Kargil had demonstrated that air power could dramatically influence a mountain battlefield. But it is also showing that air operations needed accurate information and close coordination with ground forces. Technology becomes a weapon. The Kargil battlefield belonged to an era when satellite imagery, Battlefield surveillance and communications were already important, but the following decades would transform warfare. Drones became increasingly important. Satellite technology improved. Precision guided weapons became more sophisticated. Electronic warfare expanded. Real time communication became increasingly important. Artificial intelligence began entering defense planning. The battlefield was becoming more connected. The soldier on the ground would increasingly depend on information coming from hundreds or thousands of kilometers away. Kargil had taught India one crucial lesson. The ability to see the battlefield can be as important as the ability to fight on it. The road to jointness. Over the years, India continued working towards greater integration among the armed forces. One of the major institutional developments came in 2019. India created the position of Chief of Defence Staff. The CDS was designed to promote greater jointness and integration among the three services and provide a single point military interface for important defense matters. The idea reflected a lesson that had become increasingly important since Kargil. Future wars would demand greater coordination, not simply more soldiers, not simply more weapons, but better integration. The Department of Military Affairs. Alongside the creation of the CDS, the government established the Department of Military Affairs. Its responsibilities include important aspects of military affairs and promoting greater integration among the armed forces. This represented a structural change in India's defense administration. The larger objective was to reduce unnecessary separation between institutions and create a more integrated approach to military planning. The transformation did not happen overnight. It was a part of a long process, and Kargil was one of the events that demonstrated why such reforms were necessary. From defensive response to proactive response, Kargil also influenced India's thinking about responding to security threats. Over the years, India demonstrated a willingness to conduct military operations beyond its immediate defensive posture. In 2016, India announced surgical strikes across the line of control following the Uri terror attack. In 2019, India carried out an airstrike at Balakot following the Pulwama terror attack. These events represented a more proactive approach to counter-terrorism. The strategic environment had changed. India increasingly emphasized that terrorist attacks could result in direct consequences of those responsible. Operation Sindoor. And then came another major development, May 2025. Following the terrorist attack in Pahalgam, India launched Operation Sindoor. The operation represented another evolution in India's response to terrorism. It demonstrated the increasing role of precision weapons, drones, intelligence, surveillance, long range capabilities, and integrated military planning. The technology and doctrine of 2025 were very different from the battlefield of 1999, but there was a connection. The lessons of Kargil had become part of a much longer journey towards modern warfare. From importer to producer, there was another lesson. A country cannot depend indefinitely on external sources for critical military equipments. War can disrupt supply chains. Diplomatic relationships can change. Technology can be restricted. And during a crisis, you need equipment immediately. India therefore increasingly emphasized Atmanirbhar Bharat in defense, domestic production, indigenous research, Indian missiles, Indian artillery, Indian aircraft, Indian naval platforms, Indian electronics, Indian drones. The objective was not simply economic, it was strategic autonomy. A new generation of Indian weapons. Since Kargil, India's defense technology landscape has changed dramatically. The country has developed and inducted systems across multiple domains. The Tejas fighter represents India's indigenous aerospace ambitions. The BrahMos missile represents advanced Indian missile capabilities developed through international cooperation. The INS Vikrant represents India's growing indigenous naval shipbuilding capability. India has also developed advanced missile systems, radars, electronic warfare systems, and unmanned technologies. And the transformation continues. The mountain battlefield of 1999 was dominated by artillery, infantry, and air power. The battlefield of the future will combine land, air, sea, space, cyber, and information. The biggest lesson of Kargil. But perhaps the greatest lesson of Kargil is not technological, it is human. Technology can identify a target, a satellite can photograph a mountain, a drone can observe a position, an aircraft can strike it, an artillery gun can destroy it. But ultimately, someone still has to climb that mountain. Someone has to carry the equipment. Someone has to move through the darkness. Someone has to face the enemy, and someone has to hold the position after it is captured. Kargil reminded India that technology can multiply military power, but courage remains irreplaceable. The war that never really ended. The Kargil War officially ended in 1999, but its lesson did not. They influenced reforms, technology, military doctrine, intelligence, surveillance, jointness, defense production, and India's approach to future security challenges. The mountains became quiet, but the questions raised by Kargil continued to shape India's defense establishment. Think about the soldiers whose names we have heard throughout this series: Captain Vikram Batra, Captain Manoj Kumar Pandey, Captain Anuj Nair, Grenadier Yogendra Singh Yadav, and thousands of others. They fought a war that lasted only a few months, but the consequences of that war continued for decades. Every time India improves its surveillance, every time a new indigenous weapon enters service, every time the armed forces become more integrated, the lessons of Kargil live on. Because Kargil was not simply a war India won, it was a war that taught India. 27 years ago, Indian soldiers climbed the mountains of Kargil. Today, those mountains still remember them, but the story doesn't end with war. Because now comes the question every generation must ask: what does it take to defend a nation in the 21st century? From the mountains of Kargil to satellites in space, from Bofors guns to drones and precision weapons, India's defense story has entered a completely new era. If you want to follow that journey, subscribe to AP Knowledge Point because in our next episode, we leave the battlefield of 1999 and enter the new age of Indian defense, the rise of Atmanirbhar Bharat, from importing weapons to building them. So, till then, Jai Hind. See you in the next episode.